Brian, hey, congratulations for Big Gold Brick.
Thank you, Gig. I really appreciate it.
It is such a surreal type of movie. So it's one of those movies where we have to ask what dreams or nightmares came to you to come up with this story.
For sure, for sure. Well, you do bring up an interesting point. Dreams are actually a really big thing for me. I have trouble sleeping and have for a very long time. But not all of my dreams are bad. Some of them are good, and I try to actually incorporate them into my writing as much as I can. But the actual inspiration for this was something a bit sad. Someone pretty close to me suffered a traumatic brain injury. And the experience of sort of the mind putting itself back together for him was unbelievable to watch. And it was long and terribly difficult. And of course, I saw something that was ripe for some dark comedy. Now, obviously, the movie is not about this specific incident, but it was definitely the thing that sort of inspired me to really start putting the story together.
So all of this is possibly it's going on in Samuel's head. So tell us about developing this into a dark comedy with all these interesting, eccentric characters you came up with.
Sure. Well, I should say you said possibly going on inside of his head. So there may be more than one way to look at this, which I'm totally fine with. And so people have landed all over the map on what they think is real and what isn't. Mm-hmm. And I'll just let people do what they want with it. But yeah, I think, it's in terms of the way I work, I sort of, obviously some of the character development and some of the story development are happening in tandem, but I am a former performer. And so the way I write is very much sort of me kind of performing in my mind, sometimes even physically getting up and sort of working stuff out. And yeah, I'd like to think that, hopefully even some of the smaller parts in the film, are tantalizing to the viewer and exciting in some way. But it's hard. It would be hard for me to not project probably a lot of myself into not only the protagonist, but pretty much all the primary parts, regardless of gender. I just feel like I have to write what feels close to me. And so I'm kind of, again, projecting a lot of myself into each of these people.
So you're implying that each of these characters, it's a little bit a part of you and of your personality into each of these characters?
I would say absolutely. I would say all of them, no matter how absurd they are and how quick. But yeah, I think definitely for the main characters, I try to think of scenarios that I've been in or experiences that I've had and how I might be able to extrapolate them given a specific character's kind of dynamic range and their path in the film.
Wow.
Yeah.
So where are you naturally a comedic person? Is that how you manage to write these parts and come up with these ideas?
I mean, probably. I think funny is very important to me, and like having fun in my daily life is very important to me. And I'm the kind of person who's constantly doing bits with friends and sort of always have been since I was really young. I remember kind of constantly entertaining my family and stuff. And but I resisted. I had a group of friends who, when I was going to college, wanted me to go and sort of enter into a drama program, and I was really resistant to that. Eventually, it wasn't until after I actually finished college, where I went to art school, enough of my friends, they sort of pushed me to Second City in Chicago, and really were very insistent. So I started studying improv at Second City, and I absolutely loved it. But my goal was actually not to be, a lot of people's goal is to I want to be on SNL. That's where they want to go from Second City. I honestly always wanted to get to a point where I was making movies, and I had no idea how that was going to happen. But I was at Second City at the time. And for me, it ended up, the path started with acting, and then I started writing while I was acting. And then I started wanting to make films, and they started off very short and very cheap, and they've gotten longer and more expensive. Yeah.
Now, the surrealism nature of this film was a lot of this inspired because we've seen these movies, and it always these type of movies make audiences think. Is that what you're trying to strive for?
Well, I mean, I certainly hope so. I think there's two ways to sort of take in a movie. And one is to just, I want to strictly be entertained for 2 hours. And that is fine. That is absolutely the medium on one side of the coin. And I love films that are literally just about entertainment. I love many different kinds of films. I also think for certain folks, like, there may be a certain responsibility to do more than just entertain. And, if I can use the word provoke, being provocative to a degree, inspiring something in someone, stimulating someone in a certain way. From my standpoint, if I can have people be stimulated to feel something, whether it's happy or sad or perplexed, mystified, ideally not upset at the end of the film, but there's a wide range of things that I really hope people think. And I'm totally okay and would be tickled if this was the kind of film that people left the movie, maybe even didn't know what to think of it right away. And then the next morning, they're thinking about it. And 3 days later, they're thinking about it. And 2 weeks later, they're thinking about it. And hopefully 6 months later, and hopefully forever. I mean, I know when we hooked up with Samuel Goldwyn Films, thank God that's what they said. They said the whole company had sort of felt that kind of a pull on it. And I was very, very touched by that. That was definitely something that I was hoping.
Now, I know you've done quite a few short films in the past, and this is your first feature directorial debut here. Tell us what were your style before with the short films? Is this like a new territory that you've entered? I
would say no. In fact, so the two short films that really got out ahead of this, Ticky Tacky was one and Lightning Face was the other, and both of those star Oscar Isaac. And on a relative basis, they both really got out there to a certain degree. And I would say that this feature is probably like a tonal blend of those two films, if that makes sense. But if you go back to prior to that, I was doing a lot of work with Funny or Die, or a lot of my work was ending up sort of in their hands. And I wasn't directing much of that work. My other kind of close collaborators who I'm still working with, in many instances, were directing that stuff. But I still think there's a through line. I was writing that stuff and performing in it. And my writing's always been very indicative. And so I think people would hopefully see a through line over all of these kind of short form pieces. But it's not to say that I won't allow myself to sort of change, but to me, the change doesn't happen. It's not ultra drastic change from one project to the next. I think it's a slow kind of building change. And I also just try to listen to the piece. I think each piece is sort of demanding a certain thing out of me. And I try to let the piece, I try to pay respect to the piece as it's happening as well. Absolutely. I know I was on their IMDb page, and there was that trivia mark that says often work with Oscar Isaac. I'm assuming he's a good friend and on your speed dial for any projects, huh? we are good friends, and I think that really helps. And there's a total shorthand between the two of us. And I'm such a huge, aside from loving him as a person and being such a huge fan of him as a person, I'm a huge fan of him as a performer. I mean, he's absolutely incredible. And, I think it's pretty special when, you can go ahead and enjoy someone's company and their art that much and create stuff together. It ends up being hopefully enjoyable for everyone. I know he is a terrific performer. If you don't mind, could you tell us where all this was filmed, where you found this house, which is a centerpiece of your movie? Absolutely. We shot the whole thing in Toronto. Although in the movie, I never really indicate where it is. Obviously, the sense of reality is a little bit heightened in the film, although it probably relates to our present reality to some degree. So yeah, it's never really called out where it is. I think each little sort of town and hamlet has its own fictional name. The city is referred to as the city. So I think it works for, a lot of different places, but we did physically shoot in Toronto.
Now, when you're shooting some of these surreal scenes, some of them are, obviously using CGI, which is actually amazing. Can I say that one of the most fun scenes to watch was sort of like the Emery floating or falling from the sky? Can you tell us about that?
For sure. Well, that I will say, there needn't be any interpretation. That is absolutely a dream in the movie. There's no other way to color it. It's a dream that happens in the timeline of the film. And I had begun to work with visual effects while we were doing Lightning Face, the short film starring Oscar. But even though that short film was relatively expensive for a short film, you never have enough money. And so even with this feature, we still didn't have as much money as I would have liked to, although I'm thankful for the money that we did have. You have to be really smart shooting those visual effects sequences. And so, yeah, we were in the studio shooting that stuff. And we start off in a grocery store, and then we go to the studio for all of the stuff that sort of happens in space. And then we're on the lake shore playing kind of just this generic sea. And it's, there was a ton of storyboarding, a lot of people involved, very, very technical. The whole shoot slows way down when you're doing that stuff. You're only able to get small sections of a page out per day when you're doing that stuff. But you just bear through it, and you just hope the result is solid. And that's kind of how we did that portion of the film.
I love that scene. Tell us about why Emery was perfect to play Samuel here. I mean, Samuel is quite a character. I could tell you that.
Yeah, that part is so deceptively difficult, and I hope that people are enjoying it enough to not even think about how hard it is. Emery's doing so much, and he's playing. These 360 degrees in every direction. He's pressing every button on the panel in this performance. And Emery is someone, I was aware of his work before Brooklyn. Obviously, Place Beyond the Pines and other things. But when I saw Emery in Brooklyn, I just fell in love with him. And I've told the story before. I like ran out of the theater and just prayed that one day I'd be able to work with him. And luckily, the chance came on this film, and he has pleased me to such a degree. I joked around with him at one point. I'm like, man, you're like a combo of Brando and Belushi in this thing. And he was laughing and told me to get out of his face. But I really love the work he did in this thing. And we went crazy together, shooting this part. It was a ton of fun.
I think he did an excellent job. Now, as for the other main character who's in most of the scenes is Andy Garcia, who plays Floyd. I don't usually see Andy Garcia in a dark comedy. So how did you pull this one off?
Well, that's exactly right. And that was something that was, very high in my mind when thinking about Andy. Andy was like perfect for this part. Although I don't tend to write with people in mind. I do tend to sort of keep a parallel list of people that I love while I'm writing. I just don't try to meld it into when I'm working. And so, you pray you get someone like Andy to agree to do something like this. And when it happens, you almost don't believe it. He's someone who I worshiped as a child. He's someone who, even when he's playing a smaller part, to me, he's oftentimes the best thing in the film. And I was actually unaware myself until I met Andy that I think initially when he was acting, he was in more of a comedic vein. He ended up becoming this huge sort of dramatic, super heavy kind of a guy. And it's funny because he is that. He does have that. As much as I love him, he still kind of scares me a little bit. He's just got such a presence about him, and but he's also, again, as I said about Oscar and Emery, he's can be hilarious. I mean, there's times when we weren't shooting, I just was crying, and there's times when we were shooting, I was crying, laughing. I don't want to spoiler alert here, but there's a scene with a mask that Andy has to put on that I was crying. I had to sort of step away at points. I could not stop laughing. He's a very funny man.
There are so many scenes that came out of left field or right field or any field in this film. It's amazing, the imagery that you put in, or the characters that you actually input. But I do have to ask, one of the characters that you put in that just threw me off is the bodyguard that looks like some kind of Neanderthal. Why?
Well, my answer is always going to be why not. But it's something. A lot of times I try not to censor myself in over analyzing why I'm drawn towards developing a certain thing. And that character's name is Tor. And I always knew he was going to be a very looming, imposing, maybe slightly funny looking presence. And I don't want to give away what his one line is. I always knew it would be one line, and I call it a line, yes. But he was just a physical thing that I knew I personally wanted to see. And selfishly, I have to admit, man, I do try to entertain myself first. Not that I'm not thinking about the audience, because I am, but I'm absolutely trying to sort of tick my own boxes first. And Tor is one of those examples of something I just had to see. And so there we have him.
Well, I'll tell you this, Brian. This film is amusing, and the funniest thing is I feel like the amusement is more on your end. but otherwise it is fascinating with the characters, with everything thrown. I mean, everything was thrown at us as the audiences. But Brian, thank you very much for making this movie Big Gold Brick, and thank you very much for talking to us about this really funny movie.
Absolutely, Gig. I really appreciate it. Thank you for watching, and thanks so much.
Hey, thank you. Next time.
All right.